Hello, welcome back to Learn Oikonomia. In this video, we are going to answer the question, how do importing and exporting impact economy or our economy? We can see that today's world is a world of globalization. In today's global economy, consumers are used to see products from every corner of the world. We can go for imports and exports on a large scale. These overseas products or imports would provide more choices to the consumers. And as a result of this, we can see that we can have choice in the market. We can get products cheaply than those products which are domestically produced in the market. At certain times, we could see that imported products are cheaper than the goods which are produced in our nation. At certain other times, we can see that our goods or the domestic goods are cheaper than the goods imported from other nations. When there are too many imports coming into a country in relation to its exports, we can see that our nation needs to pay a load to other nations. In such a situation, there's a need for our economy to deal with current account deficit. Devaluation of currency would come to the rescue of such an economy. Devaluation of a country's currency can have a huge impact on everyday life of a nation's citizens. This is so because the value of a currency is one of the biggest determinants of nation's economic performance, which we call as the gross domestic product. Maintaining an appropriate balance of imports and exports, this is a crucial determinant or this is a crucial factor for every country to grow. The importing and exporting activity of a nation can influence its GDP, it would influence its exchange rate, and also it will influence its inflation level in the economy. Definitely, interest rate too is not free from exports and import. Exports and imports too would affect interest rates. Or we can see that interest rate too is influenced by imports and exports. When a nation is importing goods, this is something which represents an outflow of funds from a country to some other country. For example, if India is importing commodities from US, we can see that money flows from India to the US. Local companies are the importers and they make payments to overseas entities or exporters. A high level of imports would indicate robust domestic demand and growing economy. If these imports are merely productive assets, especially if these are in the form of machinery, if these are in the form of equipment, then that will help in our production, that will help in domestic productions. A healthy economy is considered to be the one where both exports and imports are experiencing growth. This would indicate economic strength as well as sustainable trade surplus or deficit. If exports are growing but imports have declined significantly, this is considered to be a better situation. On the other hand, if exports are falling and imports are rising, that is considered to be a harmful situation. For example, the US trade deficit tends to worsen when economy is growing strongly. This too can happen. So, in certain times, we could see that even though imports are increasing, that would create in economic growth and development. This is the level at which US imports exceeds US exports. However, US chronic trade deficit has not impeded it from continuing to have productive economic growth. However, in general, what we could see is a rising level of imports and a trade deficit can hamper economic growth. Moving to the impact on exchange rate. In the initial slides, we have seen that exports and imports would influence exchange rate. The relationship between a nation's exports and imports and its exchange rate is a complicated matter. This is so because there exists a constant feedback loop between international trade and the way a country's currency is valued in the international market. Exchange rate has considered to have an effect on trade surplus or trade deficit which would affect many other variables in the economy. In general, we can see that a weaker domestic currency would stimulate exports and makes imports more expensive. On the other hand, a strong domestic currency hampers export and makes imports cheaper. For instance, consider an electronic component which is priced at $10 in the US market that will be exported to India. Okay, US is exporting this commodity to India. Assume the exchange rate is 50 rupees to the US dollar. So just neglecting the shipping as well and other kinds of transaction costs such as importing duties, we can see that $10 electronic component would cost the Indian importer 500 rupees. That is $10 into 50, that is 500. If dollar is to strengthen against Indian rupee to have a level of 55 rupees to $1, and also assuming that the US exporter does not increase the price of the component, then the new price would be 550 rupees, that is $10 into 55. This would be charged by the Indian importer. This would be charged from the Indian importer. This may force the Indian importer to look for cheaper components from other locations. Here, a 10% appreciation in the dollar versus rupee has diminished the US exporters' competitiveness in the Indian market. At the same time, we can see that as an exchange rate of 50 rupees to $1 in some other industry, for example, a garment exporter in India whose primary market is in the US. Here, a shirt that exporter sells for $10 in the US market would result in receiving 500 rupees when export proceeds are received. If the rupee weakens to 55 rupees, then what happens is that the exporter can now sell the shirt for $9.09 to receive the same amount. So a 10% depreciation in the rupee versus dollar has some improvement in the Indian exporters' competitiveness in the US market. The result of 10% appreciation of the dollar versus rupee has rendered US exporters of electronic components uncompetitive. So this is what we could see in the international market. And the flip side is that 10% depreciation of rupee has improved the competitiveness of Indian garments. When this scenario is multiplied by millions of transactions, currency moves can have a drastic impact on currency export as well as imports. Moving to the impact on inflation and interest rate, we can see that inflation and interest rate would definitely affect our exports and imports, especially through their influence on exchange rate. Higher inflation will lead to high interest rate, and whether or not this results in strong currency or weak currency is not that clear to many economists. Traditional currency theory tells that a currency with high inflation rate will depreciate against a currency with a lower inflation rate. According to the theory of uncovered interest rate parity, we can see the difference in the interest rate between two countries equals to the expected change in their exchange rate. So if interest rate differential between two nations is 2%, then the currency of the high interest nation would be expected to depreciate 2% against the currency of the low interest rate nation. So here we can see that since the investors have to be confident that the currency depreciation will not offset high yields, the strategy used by these people are very important. They have to make it sure that the international market is having stable currencies in motion. A stronger domestic currency can have adverse effect on exports and on trade balance. High inflation can impact exports. These higher costs can have a substantial impact on competitiveness of exports. A low interest rate environment that has been a norm around most of the world since 2008-9 global credit crisis. This has resulted in investors as well as speculators chasing the better yields. And this has offered by currencies with high interest rate. So that's all about today. Please like, share and subscribe to this channel for more videos. You can be a part of my Telegram channel and Telegram group to discuss your doubts. I'll be providing the links of these in the description box. Thank you.